I, along with millions of other Americans, tuned into the Joe Rogan episode featuring Dave Smith and Douglas Murray. I was hoping to find good arguments, new perspectives, and information that would help me better understand the Israel-Palestine conflict. And what I found there was smears, credential arguments, and a strange lack of anything substantial to really help me understand what's going on. And while I was feeling this way, I was struck by this article I saw by Jason Jones called "Forgive Douglas Murray, for he knows not what he does." And this struck me for a few reasons. One, as an American just observing from the outside, it really seemed like Douglas wasn't very sincere and wasn't actually there to make good arguments or discuss the problems at hand, that he was sent in there to actually quash discussion. And number two, Jason Jones satisfies Douglas Murray's biggest argument and meme going around currently.
You've never been.
Well, he's actually been many times, and he's the president and founder of an organization called the Vulnerable Peoples Project, serving the most oppressed and marginalized minorities all over the Middle East and the world. And so the goal of this interview is to provide a perspective for Americans that are between the most extreme elements of the conflict going on right now to actually help people understand what's really going on. Basically, where I'm at, and I feel like a lot of our audience is, when it comes to the Middle East in general, is I think people are very well-meaning. I don't know if everyone feels like they're getting great information. Seeing your track record and history literally being boots on the ground to defend the human dignity and the vulnerable of Christians in the Middle East, but everywhere, Africa, etc. I really wanted to speak to someone that's done work on behalf of people that have been directly impacted by foreign policy, American foreign policy, what we're paying. So I was one of the people, honestly, and I want to get into your background a little bit, but I watched this Douglas Murray debate, and probably like most people, did not feel like he was being honest. And whether or not you think Dave Smith was right or if Rogan was right, it just felt like there was something off about what Douglas Murray was saying, whether it was the credentialism, whether it was the dismissiveness. I could have been the accent. I'm not sure, but you sure thought so as well. And I thought you did a great job in this piece. So first off, Jason, tell us a little bit more about what you do specifically in the region, and why did that piece rub you the wrong way?
Yeah, well, today is a great day, Tom. Thank you for having me on. In fact, I'm very grateful for the Loop and Catholic Vote today. You brought to the world's attention the slipping away of the ancient Christian communities in Iraq, which with Iranian militias are now making their final push to purge Iraq of its last Christians, the very last Christians that are there. In 2002, there were over 1 million Christians in Iraq, and now we're down to less than 200,000. And in the Nineveh Plains, I believe it's less than 40,000. And with the incursions and the aggressive behavior of the Iranian-backed militias, we may be seeing the very last weeks of Christians in what is really our Holy Land. A lot of Catholics don't understand, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, especially Syria and Iraq. There have been first century Christian communities, and there have been Christian communities in Iraq since the first century. I've been in churches that were founded by St. Thomas himself. And so wow. I just thank you for bringing the world's, the Catholic community in the United States' attention to what's happening in Iraq. And I founded my organization in 2002. I'm an infantry veteran. And I founded my organization in 2002, trying to harness the influence of the pro-life movement and the conservative movement at the time. This might sound like a bad idea, and in retrospect, it didn't work. But my hope was to harness especially Catholic conservatives to oppose the invasion of Iraq. So this was in the lead up to the invasion, and listening to St. John Paul the Great, and I agreed with him from my understanding of the region. I had just come out of graduate school where I studied military science and operational studies. I was really concerned for the plight of these ancient Christian communities. And we now know, with the shattering of the secular order, the secular equilibrium, as it was called, with the removing of Saddam Hussein, we saw the Christian communities and the Yazidi communities and the Kakai and others decimated. And so that's why I founded my organization. So you're right. We are a Catholic apostolate. Our mission is to stand with the most vulnerable people in the world when the world is left. But I will say VPP serves Christians, Yazidis, Jews, Muslims around the world. We really seek to stand with those communities that have been abandoned. And in fact, on October 7th, we have a program in Nigeria called the Vulnerable Parish Project, where we provide solar and cameras. We need solar for the cameras. We put in the solar, we put in the cameras, and we hire security guards for parishes they're a threat for Islamist attacks. We added the last synagogues in Nigeria to our security protocol in Nigeria after October 7th. So we are just really committed to protecting the most vulnerable communities on earth. We think that is the role of the Catholic. That is our vocation.
Right. And so I guess just jumping right into this Murray debate and what's going on in the Middle East, what are people missing that are just getting mainstream information in America from the reality of what's actually going on in that region right now?
Well, the first thing I think we have to all recognize is that, and one of the missions of the Vulnerable People Project is to run influence campaigns for ethnic and religious minorities. So you look in Iraq, for example, or Gaza. We'll look at Iraq during the lead up to the invasion and the withdrawal to today. You have great powers. You have Russia, the United States, Iran, the Gulf states like Saudi. You have Israel. You have the European Union countries like Germany and others. You have Turkey, obviously. They have a lot of interest on what happens in Iraq. And they run influence campaigns to form public opinion, especially in the United States, right? But they try to form our opinion, not to advance our interests or the interests of the people of Iraq, but their interests, their perceived interests. And so we have to recognize when it comes to what do we think about Gaza, we are all being really hit with military-grade propaganda. We are all being targeted by really thought-out, well-funded influence campaigns. And to be blunt, Douglas Murray's appearance on Joe Rogan was a ham-fisted, catastrophic attempt at an influence campaign. And that was very clear that was thought out, that it was strategic. There were many components to it leading up to the debate, and then the minutes, hours, and even days after the debate. And it was really an attempt to stop the flood of information. You look at the polling, only self-identified Republicans who are baby boomers haven't seen a massive shift in their understanding of what's happening in Gaza. Your generation has seen a 20% shift towards empathy for the Palestinians since October 7th. And so they realized they had to address this problem, but it was a miscalculation to do it on the Joe Rogan show with Dave Smith. I think that was a big miscalculation. And as you said, I thought I had a really novel take and that no one would even get, because I didn't really address Douglas Murray's non-arguments. I just, addressed, he didn't seem very serious. He was smug, and it seemed to be a part of a larger influence campaign. And then after I started reading everyone else's take, we all had the same take. Yeah. So I didn't have a novel take at all. I wasn't, I thought I was very smart and creative, but actually everyone else in the world saw the same thing.
I think maybe the most frustrating element of that Rogan episode was that I went there looking for new information that could help me form an opinion on what's going on in the region, and I was met with seemingly tactics. And I went to listen to your episode of your show where you talked to a young Palestinian Christian who lost siblings, lost parents, I believe. His church was bombed. They just bombed a hospital. It was honestly really hard to listen to, and I don't think that information was in that episode, certainly, but even is getting beyond. It seems like it's not reaching everyone. So I guess what I'm excited to talk to you about is you do work over there in that region. You see what's going on the ground. Would you be able to provide some color as to the actual situation going on in that region?
Yeah, and I'm even tempted to give a better defense of Israel than Douglas Murray, because he actually undermined Israel's interests as if there's no defense for any of their actions against Hamas, and which obviously that's untrue as well. But I want to start with just, the brutality in which Israel's not prosecuting war against Hamas. In fact, it was reported today that Hamas is now officially larger than it was before the war started. Something that former Secretary of State Blinken himself had admitted several months ago. The Christian community specifically, as you heard in the interview with Halil, has suffered at the hands of Hamas. But we also know that Israel in its early days funded Hamas to weaken the PLO. So this game they were playing, now everyone's suffering. And I want to make this point clear too. People say the Palestinians are getting what they deserve because they supported Hamas. The last election was in 2007. Hamas didn't win a majority in any district, not one. 50% of the population was not even born yet. So about 1 in 6 people in Gaza were alive and voted for Hamas. So that's what we're looking at. So I just want to set that stage so that the idea that we're going to punish the people of Gaza, and we now know through sycamore timber, that the United States, the Gulf states, the UK funded ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria to topple Assad. So we know we also funded Hamas. We've also funded Hezbollah. And now you have the beautiful people of Gaza. The way that people talk about the people of Gaza is absolutely unbelievable. I think anti-Semitism, whenever we have this conversation, we have to say, and it's important to say we agree, we don't want to foment anti-Semitism, but I don't really hear anti-Semitism. But I hear such ingrained anti-Arab bigotry that there really is this acceptance that they are, as Douglas Murray, he appealed to Deuteronomy to say that the people of Gaza are a cult of death and we have to just choose life, therefore ethnically cleanse the Gazans. Now, I want to be a gentleman. Douglas Murray is married to a man, and I could quote Deuteronomy to him as well. In many places, I can quote the Old Testament. I wouldn't do that. It would be gentlemanly. But right. That you're going to quote Deuteronomy to foment ethnic cleansing. And the most Semitic people on earth, those most genetically related to the Jews at the time of Jesus, are the Samaritans. But following the Samaritans, it's the Christians in Gaza. And Palestinian Christians don't like to even bring this up. Because they're the descendants of the families that were in the upper room. They're the descendants of the apostles' families and friends in that first century community. Of course, there were migrations and invasions in history, but all of them could probably say honestly that they descend from those first century Christians. And they're definitely a part of those same religious communities. And the Palestinians are the first to not want to say this because they've been victimized by ethno-nationalism. So they never want to appeal to it because we know as Christians, that really doesn't matter, right? So why would you even appeal to it? But the Palestinians are a beautiful people. And the idea that they should suffer collective punishment is because of a deeply held bigotry that most of us have. Tom, I don't know if you have it. I do. And I wrote an article called Help, I'm an Anti-Palestinian Bigot. And I wrote this as an audit of myself when I was in Egypt and we were sending trucks into Gaza through the Rafah gate before the gate was bombed and closed. And people told me, you're going to be called an anti-Semite for sending food to churches in Gaza. And I said, that sounds strange. Well, let me audit myself. Let me do an examination of conscience and see if maybe I do have it. I'm like, well, I don't know if I can say this on your show. It's a Catholic show. I think the first 14 times I was drunk as a young man or boy was at bar mitzvahs. Like I get a lot of Jewish friends. I still have a lot of Jewish friends.
Yeah, I think that plays, Jason.
Yeah, I can admit that. I mean, yeah. I remember coming home from a bar mitzvah once. My dad's like, you want to shoot hoops? And I'm like, the ball's going 20 feet. Your
shooting percentage went down dramatically.
Yeah, my shooting percentage went way. And my dad's like, were you drinking? No, Dad. Not at all. And I would have confessed it. If you read my articles, I'm too honest. And people listen to my podcast go, you're not in a confessional. You shouldn't say those things. But I would have been open because our prejudices don't, so long as they're not informing our opinions, as long as that we look at them and address them. But in trying to, in this examination of conscience, I really did come to understand I do have some bigotry in it. I probably don't naturally value the lives of Arabs as I would of Jews. And it's just how we've been formed by our media, through our relationships, through our communities. And this is something that's okay, so long as we're not out there saying things like flatten Gaza. We should make it look like Nagasaki. We have American Christian politicians going to Israel and signing bombs with smiles on their face. This isn't something that a Christian should do or would do. And to me, this shows that we really don't value the lives of those Palestinians the way that we would value our own lives. And you saw that in Douglas Murray. It's very clear. He was dismissive. And I think it's hard for those of us who are well-formed Catholics to understand that in today's world that there can be people that are so bigoted that they would be dismissive of the unprecedented casualties of civilians in Gaza. For example, and I can just give you some some facts, and I'll start with the churches. On October 19th, 2023, a 2,000-pound bomb was dropped on the oldest church in continuous use in the world, St. Porphyrius Church in Gaza. On December 16th, two Catholic women, Nahida and her daughter, Samar, were walking from their church to the restroom when they were shot by Israeli snipers. There was no Hamas there. There were no human shields. They were shot by snipers. No explanation was given. The Patriarch of Jerusalem called it cold-blooded murder. IDF didn't even address it. There was a Christian hospital was struck this Palm Sunday. So this week, we just had another hospital. It was a Baptist hospital staffed by Anglicans that was destroyed. We've had more journalists killed in this war than not only in World War II in every theater, but in every war in the world since World War II. More journalists killed. So if I were Douglas Murray, now they say, oh, human shields, or there are tunnels. There's no tunnels under our churches. That's just not true. These Catholic women who were shot by snipers were not being human shields. Khalil, who works with me, this Palestinian Christian young man, actually worked for a Christian Jewish partnership organization when the war started, and is really adamant and advocating for not only Palestinians but Israelis. But he lost his father and his 18-year-old sister, and his sister died a year ago this week, at the hands of the IDF. No, there were no tunnels under her feet. She wasn't being used as a human shield. Now, does Hamas bear some responsibility, or a lot of responsibility for what's happening to the Palestinian people? Of course. Is it fair to say that the Palestinians should just shrug off Hamas? How? Yeah. Really? How? And that doesn't even make sense. Should they suffer collective punishment? At the hands of a military with the most sophisticated technology in the world, should the civilians? 90% of the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed. Over 90% of the Christians in Gaza have lost their homes. 100% of the churches, the Christian churches, 100% of the Catholic and Christian hospitals, and 100% of the Christian schools have been bombed. And so if Douglas Murray wanted the new information that I keep looking for, is please present to the world evidence that Hamas has tunnels under our hospitals and churches. Please give us evidence to why the World Food Kitchen people were killed on a route the IDF told them to take. They took it at the time they were told to take it. And they were not only struck with drones, there were follow-up sorties of drones that came to make sure every one of those volunteers that simply came to feed the children of Gaza were brutally murdered. But there's never any explanation given. And people will say, cavalier, off the cuff, human shields, it's Hamas's fault. They don't really value, they're not a part, and this is where the point of my argument with Douglas Murray was, forgive him for he knows not what he does. He knows what he's doing to distract our attention from the brutality of Israel to the civilians of Gaza. But what he doesn't understand is he sees his great project as preserving Western civilization. What he doesn't understand is that people like Douglas Murray are swinging an axe at the root of Western civilization. And the root of Western civilization is the incarnation of the second person of the Trinity. Western civilization is the shadow of Christendom. And everything that we as conservatives want to conserve are those beautiful truths that were exemplified and taught to the world by our Catholic faith. That's the truth. And the fundamental, in our relationship to our brothers and sisters on this planet, the fundamental truth is we were created to love each other. And what a beautiful truth that we understand. We are created to love each other. We were not created to be ethno-national cheerleaders in an ethnic cleansing.
Can you explain that ethnic cleansing? So to me, that seems like the next step here. What could possibly be the justification for bombing 90% of Gaza, for killing women, what would Israel's justification be for doing that to anyone at any time?
Well, in 1967, Israel defeated all of its neighbors in wars in like a week, right? It defeated its great powers in wars in a week. But you can't defeat Hamas that just has small arms with all of the ordnance that has been dropped. You don't have to take my word for it. Just Google News search Israel civil war. Very serious commentators are now saying Israel is on the brink of a civil war. Why? Because the people of Israel are waking up to the fact that this has never been about getting the hostages back. And obviously, we all want the hostages returned. But is Netanyahu behaving as a man who's really committed primarily to getting those hostages back? It doesn't seem it to me, and it doesn't seem it to an ever increasing majority of Israelis. The goal is plain and simple. It is the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, and it is the annexation of the West Bank. I was just in the West Bank in January. And while I was there, I witnessed firsthand as settlers come and they try to steal the homes of Christians. Christians who, and you can go to our Instagram page, Vulnerable People Project, or our website, you can see video footage of settlers coming to steal the land from Christians who have lived there longer than my family has lived in the United States, probably longer than my family has lived in the UK. We were probably still in Normandy or in Scandinavia, and their families were there. And what's really disheartening is the evangelical community and this heresy. To me, Christian Zionism is an apostasy. Because if you deny that Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of all the promises to Abraham, you're not a Christian. I don't understand how I don't know what you are, but you're not a Christian in the Orthodox sense of the word. And they're actually, I work in Sudan. Right now in Sudan, the Christians are being slaughtered right now, this very day. VPP is involved in evacuating Christians as fast as we can. In Iraq, the Christian communities are on the brink of being ethnically cleansed from a place they've lived since the first century. In October of last year, we saw the Christians in Artsakh ethnically cleansed by Azerbaijan, and the world was silent. So it's nothing new. We were silent, in the past 20 years as Christians were cleansed from Iraq and Syria. But what's different about Gaza and the West Bank is that Christians in the West aren't silent. We're actually so many evangelicals and Catholics who consume evangelical media have been cheering on the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians if in some way this is God's will. And you probably heard in the interview on my show, the Jason Jones Show with Halil, it's heartbreaking for Christians. Christians that descended, their ancestors were in the upper room. Their ancestors shared the gospel of Jesus Christ with the world, and it eventually made it to our wild, I don't know where your ancestors are from, but I come from, the wild, Julius Caesar said, the Northwestern Europeans, that there's no hope to civilize these people.
Kingdom of Croatia, personally.
Oh, so you're more civilized. So your ancestors are more civilized than mine. So, okay. But it's unimaginable. I can't imagine being a Christian from Bethlehem. And so many Western Christians will ask these Palestinian Christians, when did you convert? Like, when my grandpa met Jesus. What do you mean did I convert, It's
I did an interview with Simone Rizkala about the Armenian Christians back when the blockade was going on. And it was fascinating talking to her because she's like, to ask someone from that region if they are Christian, it almost doesn't compute. It'd be almost closely to saying that you're ethnically Christian because you are. You're from that region. They've always been Christian since the time of Christ. So I have a couple questions for you, Jason. I mean, so two things I think at play here. One, there is a natural anti-Arab bias in America. I think part of that was the war machine trying to get us to go to Iraq and Afghanistan and things like that. And then number two, I do think there's a lot of very well-meaning Catholics and Christians that are concerned with what's going on, that aren't maybe of the hyper Zionist evangelical strain, that maybe just are normal, maybe conservative Catholics, don't have a lot of expertise, but they see, the crazy rabid college kids, locking up schools, causing problems, saying death to America. So it's almost like almost a false dichotomy, if you will. People aren't sure exactly where they fit into it. So maybe I'm curious your response. How would you recommend people in America who are well-meaning like that to try to think about the issue as Americans and maybe don't necessarily want to have to pick a side here in a conflict that they don't know exactly how to react to?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're launching a new campaign next week called IStandWithCivilians.com, because people are always looking to pick a side. Well, the side that we pick is women and children, the orphans. And the best way to stand with an orphan is to make sure a child is not made an orphan by a senseless war, right? So let's oppose senseless wars. We should be really careful. You know, there's people like Jonathan Cahn and others who Catholics will read, and their books are actually very anti-Catholic. And they fundamentally deny Christianity because we recognize that we are the mystical body of Christ. We are the church is the fulfillment of all the promises to Abraham. That's what Christians have all believed until all Christians believed this until the early 19th century, before this new heresy took root and began to spread across the English-speaking world primarily. But when you hear people like Douglas Murray call Arabs or all Muslims a cult of death, and that we need to choose life, this is genocidal language here. As my Muslim friends and my friends from the Middle East will say, we didn't have World War I and World War II and the Russian Revolution and the Holodomor. You know, we didn't have the Spanish Civil War. We know 2 million Arab civilians died in our wars in the Middle East in the past 3 decades. So for us to sit there and go, we know more than we would want people to judge the United States or the West by the wars of the past 40 years. We wouldn't want, or for 140 years, we wouldn't want, obviously, we don't want to judge an entire community by its extremists. And then you have to put it in perspective, which really frustrates me. I just found out through Doge that we have been funding Boko Haram. Boko Haram. I kind of guessed we were funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda going back over 10 years ago in Syria to topple Assad. Obviously, a horrible idea, but at least it makes some sort of devilish sense. Funding Boko Haram makes no sense. You look at Gaza, this small community. Well, I don't know what the GDP of Gaza is. It's in the low billions, you know, and you have a country like ours with 23 trillion funding ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas. And then you're going to blame the poor civilians that they're stuck under the boot of extremists and that extremism is expanding in their community. Imagine if somewhere out there was an economy 1,000 times larger than ours funding the most extremist elements of our society. What would our society look like? So we need, as Catholics, when we hear people dehumanize any community, a lot of my friends that are really hardcore Zionists, and they loved my writing for the past 2 decades because I've been a big critic of anti-Semitism in the Catholic Church and the rise of anti-Semitism on the right. So they were taken aback that all of a sudden I'm advocating so aggressively on behalf of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. But there's no contradiction here. There's no contradiction here. No more do I want to see bigotry or hatred or violence against Jews. No, I don't want to see this against Arabs. Just here in Texas, in the past week, we had 2 young Afghan girls, and my organization works in Afghanistan serving the Christians and the Christian communities in Afghanistan and those who served alongside U.S. forces. We were big and we're very involved in Afghanistan, and we've resettled a lot of Afghan minorities and former allies. 2 young Afghan girls were beaten and stabbed in middle school this week in Texas because they were wearing hijabs and stabbed in the neck. In the United States, 2 girls for wearing hijabs were beaten by a mob of kids, and 1 girl was stabbed in the neck. This is horrible. So I don't want to see this to young Arabs. I don't want to see this to young Jews. We wouldn't want any community to suffer this in the United States of America. And as a Catholic, I'm committed to stand with the vulnerable. This is what I thank God for our faith. I thank God that it's coming up on Good Friday. To me, the Pietà has always been, to me, the physical image of the Catholic apostolate. That our King is Jesus Christ, and he is easy to find because I can find him in the widow, the orphan, the homeless, the imprisoned, the child in the womb, the religious minority facing ethnic cleansing or genocide. And so this is what we are called to do as Catholics. So to your point, the first thing we should do is stop. We need to stand up to anti-Arab bigotry that just shrugs at these unbelievable casualties, yawns. And guess what? Everyone under 30 is seeing this live streamed on Twitter and Wikipedia and on Instagram. And that's why there's such a big division between the boomers and everyone younger, because everyone under 30 is watching an ethnic cleansing live streamed on their phone every day, and they're startled by it.
Not just startled, but frustrated, I think, that our own government is complicit in funding this. I don't think Israel's able to be nearly as aggressive as they are without American weapons and funding.
That is the great frustration. You know, there are horrible things happening all over the world. I was a big critic of Obama's drone war. Under George W. Bush's drone war, one civilian died. The Bush administration made horrible mistakes in the Middle East as well, but only one civilian died. In the Obama administration, thousands of civilians and hundreds of children. And no one paid attention to this. You know, it's quite frustrating. And to know that a 2,000-pound bomb fell from an American-made plane. The plane was made in America, the bomb was made in America, and our taxpayer dollars funded for the plane and the bomb. And that 2,000-pound bomb fell on what? The oldest church in continuous use in the world. And not a peep. Not a peep. Why is that? Well, can I get controversial here? I mean,
go for it.
You know, the USCCB in its original incarnation was founded during World War I to mobilize Italians and Germans to support our involvement in the most ridiculous war in human history, World War I, which is a great catastrophe. So, you saw the United States drop an atomic bomb in the Catholic city of Nagasaki. And Fulton Sheen courageously, 6 weeks later at Catholic University, Monsignor Sheen at the time, gave a powerful condemnation of dropping of the bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But he was the only one. You had the Elizabeth Ann Scott, probably the greatest philosopher of the 20th century in the UK, and you had Bishop Fulton Sheen in the United States, and the rest of the world was, no one was saying anything. And no one said anything when the Christians were ethnically cleansed from Iraq and Syria during, the past 20 years. And I'll say, if we go back to Armenian Artsakh, it was Israel that funded Azerbaijan in their ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. And they did this because it was their relationship with Azerbaijan has strategic advantage for their struggles with Iran. But if I, as a Christian, can't advocate for Christians, I'm not an instrument of a state, especially not my own country. And I saw Catholic organizations apologize for the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh and said it was a strategic necessity for Israel. And Hungary, a country that we're supposed to celebrate, blocked military aid to Armenia. And so this is the reality of it all, that these vulnerable Christian communities are just seen as pawns and pieces to be wiped off the table and removed. And those of us who are American Christians, we are the most privileged, influential Christians that have ever walked the face of the earth. And we have an opportunity to leverage our influence on behalf of the suffering body of Christ. And there is no Christian community in the world suffering more than Christians in Gaza. Period.
Two things come to mind. One, I know certainly from my generation, the type of subterfuge is creating the next generation of anti-Semites. Like I'm watching it happen before my very eyes. So the fact that you're creating an empire of lies is going to radicalize people in that way, which is terrible. I don't want that. And I see some people I know go down that road, and it's terrible. But two, it just feels so bleak, and we're powerless, and these evil forces are moving. And I know you're saying even with the Pieta, like this is watching this suffering is actually the crucifixion kind of that Jesus calls us all to experience in some mystical way, especially during Holy Week. Do you have any stories? I know I love that interview you did with the young man from Palestine, but just in your ministry, Vulnerable People's Project over there, not to artificially bring us up here, but Do you have any stories that specifically stick out to you as inspirational that you'd like to share, maybe with a broader audience?
Yeah, can I address the rise of anti-Semitism though, real quick?
Yeah,
I'm
of course.
glad that you brought that up. I don't know how much time we have.
Yeah, plenty. Go for it.
I don't like to bring it up because I don't, again, want to make the Palestinians feel like the only reason that I'm opposed to the catastrophe that they're suffering is because it's going to lead to a rise of anti-Semitism, right? They're an end in themselves.
Right. I think that's a great distinction. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought it up. But we also have to recognize that we've seen this. We've seen the rise of anti-Semitism. And one thing I think it's important to make clear, the loudest and most faithful and articulate voices in defense of the Palestinians are Jews.
Yeah.
Dave Smith, Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky.
Who was the guy that made that documentary too? You pointed it out. It was No Other Land, I think.
Yes.
And that was a Palestinian and Jew who did it together?
Yeah, it was so beautiful. Man, and I got goosebumps. And you know the gentleman that made the film, the Palestinian, as soon as he went home, he was beaten and arrested. I don't know if you know that.
No, I did not know that.
It wasn't really well reported. Could you imagine just won the Oscar, you go back home to the West Bank and you're beaten by a mob, and then they come and they arrest you. And that's what happens. But I do think it's important that those of us who are standing up for the Palestinians when the wild enthusiasms of hatred for the Jews come, will also be the ones standing with them. It takes moral courage now to stand with Palestinians. And that's why I just want to thank you. I run the Vulnerable People Project, and so I guess people expect me to be quote unquote eccentric or extreme in my commitment to vulnerable people. The great Catholic anthropologist Rene Girard gives his most eloquent and beautiful talk, and anyone can find it on YouTube, and it's in his book, I See Satan Fall, I believe, where he talks about Peter's denial. How Peter, when you stand in solidarity with the scapegoat, you become as vulnerable as the scapegoat. And Peter knew this, and that's why he denied Christ. So he was swept away by the crowd to deny the scapegoat, our scapegoat, Jesus Christ. When you stand with the scapegoat, that's why our Lord did something so uncanny. In the Middle East 2,000 years ago, he knelt down next to a woman caught in the act of adultery. I don't think I would do that in Iran today. I don't think you would. Our Lord did that 2,000 years ago, yes?
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Because when you stand next to a woman caught in the act of adultery, you might get hit in the head with a stone yourself. When you stand next to a man being crucified, you're probably going to be crucified yourself. In fact, all of the apostles, as you know, suffered a violent death, except for John. And I believe John didn't, because he was crucified with Christ. He was there. Why should he suffer twice? He actually suffered the crucifixion at the foot of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. What was my point there? I'm rambling.
I think that was on the first point about solidarity with Palestinians.
I just wanted to thank you. So it takes courage for you on this show to say, wait a second. We're not saying that Israel doesn't, the state of Israel does not have the right to protect itself. It has the duty. It has the fundamental duty to protect its civilians. By the way, something it fundamentally failed to do on October 7th, and we need to see what happened and why. I think the Israelis should be very interested in that. They have the fundamental duty. But then we have our behavior in war must be just. And we also have to ask, is Israel making Israel more secure? Of course they are not. Are they making the United States more secure? Of course they're undermining our security.
I think that's the original betrayal, just for a red-blooded American looking at this situation. We get hit with there's just there's lines people say but don't even really know why they say it. One of them is Israel's our greatest ally and that they somehow have a big benefit to us. I think for just young men listening to that, that's where they're like, what are you talking about? We've just been destabilizing the Middle East region and intentionally agitating everyone, and it's going to backfire on us in the same way that it did post-Afghanistan, and we're watching it with our own eyes. Like it's a horrible, like a horror movie happening over and over again. So, and we're co-signing it all because we're arming them, and so something dropped today. It was, I think Tulsi Gabbard and JD and Trump just barely stopped bombing Iran. I think it was supposed to happen today. At least that's what's being reported. And Israel was making plans already, basically assuming that the United States was going to be on board with it because really they can only act with the United States in their back pocket. And to just like the fact that we would even think about bombing Iran right now shakes me to my core. I mean, that's just because also I'm going to be the one who gets drafted, you know, or my kids, or it's not going to be the 60-year-old hyper-Zionist that worships Israel and just wants them to do whatever in the region. So I'm sorry, maybe I'm betraying the interview here by being a little bit more personal than I intended.
No, I appreciate that.
These are just things that I think a lot of young men my age, young Catholic men my age, are thinking right now. We're not crazy. We're not on the other side.
No, and you should be thinking this way. First of all, as Trump said, and why I love Trump, I actually campaigned for Trump in Pennsylvania to the Muslim and Middle Eastern Christian community, saying he's our only hope for peace in the Middle East. It'll be business as usual with Kamala. And he said something that was really beautiful. He said, why do I want to bomb Iran? They're beautiful people. You know, they're beautiful. Why do I want to see bombs fall in Iran? That would be the worst thing. To see grown-ups, adults, people whose hearts, conscience, and mind should be formed by our faith, by the sacraments, by the Holy Spirit, talk about violence and war like it's risk is unbelievable. And you say it could be you. When I served in the infantry. My father served in the infantry. My grandfather served in the infantry. And all the men in my family serve. It's what we do. And I remember when I opposed the invasion of Iraq at the time, and I was chairman of the Young Republicans, and I would get in these heated debates. And I would say, you know, my son will end up fighting in your stupid war. I have 7 children. And I had my oldest son ended up fighting in Iraq and Syria. So my son fought in a war that I opposed, but none of their sons served. They didn't serve. And you're right. You know, I have 3 sons that'll be going in the military in the next 4 to 5 years. In 4 years, 5 years, I'll have 3 sons in the military. So, yeah, unfortunately, you know, Iran is not Iraq, and Iran is not the Taliban. Iran is a powerful country with proxies all over the Middle East. And I'll tell you, if we bombed Iran today, and you mark this, with the spread of Iranian-backed militias across Iraq, the first thing that will happen is the evisceration of the Yazidi, the Kakai, and the Christians, the Catholic Chaldeans and the Assyrians. They're gone. We cannot protect them, and they will suffer, and they will be wiped from the map. This is the reality. And by the way, their lives matter too. The Yazidis, you know, this is the thing. We care about Israel because we were formed to care about Israel. We care about our interests because we were formed. We're formed by Russia and Saudi and Turkey. They run influence campaigns on us. But the Chaldean Christians of Iraq, maybe if you live in Detroit or San Diego.
I actually grew up in Detroit.
So you've been formed by Chaldeans, maybe. This is probably why I'm on your show. Because you care about these people because they're real to you. They're actually human beings.
I've talked to them. Yeah.
Yeah,
they're all intensely concerned about this. And
they should be. And it's really, they're my friends. I've been there. You know, I go there. I hope to be there in the coming weeks soon. And I just returned a couple of weeks ago. I still have dysentery from my last trip. So, I don't know should I bring that up? Is that appropriate?
No, we're going there in this episode.
Can I bring it up?
Hey, if you head over to Hamtramck, you can get some good shawarma. The Middle Eastern food is bar none in Detroit, Metro Detroit area. Maybe that's what got me. I don't know. But
when you go to the prejudice, like when you go to Gaza or the West Bank, Charlie Kirk recently said, and I know Charlie. I love Charlie. His organization bought like tens of thousands of copies of my last book to give to their young people for a summer reading program. But he said that he wouldn't be safe in the West Bank. It's the safest place on earth. I mean, you will feel so at home. There's nothing to worry about. You can go anywhere. I go everywhere by myself, and I look out of place everywhere on earth but 3 countries and 2 states. Okay, so I don't fit in. I don't look like I belong, and I walk around. I go everywhere, and you know, West Bank is extremely safe.
You're talking about, I believe it was a comment like, if, you know, I'm not sure where I'm at on all this, but I would feel safer walking around in Israel than I would in the West Bank.
I would feel safer. I would feel safe in both.
I think that was what Charlie said, though, if I remember the clip correctly.
Okay, yeah. So, but Charlie should know he would feel I feel more at home in the West Bank, to be honest.
Why is that?
Because I'm surrounded by Christians and Catholics, and I feel really at home. I feel the culture of the Palestinian Christians is more compatible to me than secular Israel. Obviously there's Israel's a diverse country. That's the other thing I want to bring up, the ethnic cleansing that's happening in Israel. It's not just to the Christians, right, or the Palestinians, but Jewish diversity is being cleansed as well. And a lot of people don't know how diverse the Jewish community is. There's Iranian Jews, there's Jews from Yemen, from Ethiopia. We saw in 2010, it was discovered that in 2010, thousands of Ethiopian Jews, Jewish women, were forcibly sterilized at the hands of the state of Israel.
What?
Yes. You just Google it. Yes. Thousands of Ethiopian Jewish women were forcibly sterilized against their own will. And there's an ethnic cleansing that is happening. So the beautiful diversity of the Jewish community. We're also seeing the end of the Samaritan community. When you first go to the Middle East, you're shocked to meet the Samaritans. Like, they're still there. They seem like a small minority in scripture, but they're still there. And then the Yazidi are the proto-Semitic people.
So the Samaritans is in like the Good Samaritan is?
Yeah, there's still Samaritans there that worship that didn't accept the Second Temple. I call them trad Jews.
That's crazy.
Yeah, no, the Middle East, I love being Catholic because we see us in everyone. What I love about our faith is that we cannot other. It's natural to other, but we don't have an other, right? We get the privilege of being othered, which is a grace because we can feel it. We can know what it's like to be ostracized or hated for who we are or what we are, but we don't have the privilege. When I first went to Iraq, the Yazidi, their religion is pre-Abrahamic in its core and its roots. And it's not strictly monotheistic. There's a numinous reality. There are these angels. And the angels, some of them resemble, I don't want to be hurtful, but, it's led Christians, Jews, and Muslims to really ostracize the Yazidis. Like, they won't eat something a Yazidi touches. Mm-hmm. And when I first went to Iraq, I would eat off of the plate of every Yazidi I was with. I'm like, you gonna eat that? And I would just take it. And you want some of my food? And they would look at me like I was crazy. And then sometimes they would say, do you know I'm unclean? You can't eat something I've touched. And I would just shrug and look at them like they're crazy and just keep eating their food. They probably just wanted me to stop eating their food. But when you're in the presence of the Yazidi, you're like, wow, these are the descendants of the people, most likely, that Abraham came out of. So they're not an Abrahamic religion, but Abraham was of them. And then there's the Johannites. And then there's the beautiful diversity of the Jewish community. Doing the work of VPP in the Middle East, to me, proves the truth of our faith. So it just comes to life.
That's really beautiful. And I do want to continue to add color, especially from someone who's been there and walked and met people and been around these vulnerable communities, to add color, to get rid of the Arabs are savages or the people in the region are just shooting rockets all the time. Because I do think that these are the real victims, right? It's like Hamas, obviously a problem. What Israel's doing, obviously a problem. But there's these in between with nowhere to go that through no fault of their own are in this situation in their home and are just getting bombed out. But can you add more color to it? One of the big evangelical CAFs is that Israel, the state of Israel, is the Israel from the Bible. And you're saying that even within the Israeli community, there's a diversity of different Jewish people. And so that there's the secular state of Israel right now.
Yeah.
What is it homogeneous within the state of Israel right now itself? And then I don't even understand. I'm so new to all the different Jewish populations. But what would be what force is driving the ship there right now? If there's Jewish people all over the world, many of which are not on board with what's going on there. And as you said, it's secular when you walked around. So what force
Well,
is
there's
driving,
religious
I guess?
Jews as well. I feel more at home. I definitely feel more home, like in Bethlehem. I feel very home. I feel really home in Iraq. I want to be charitable. Like when I'm in Israel, it doesn't feel real to me. It feels artificial. It just feels, it's just, when you're in Iraq or Syria or the West Bank, you feel the deepness and the roots. And look, I have Jewish friends that their family they're Arab Jews. So they've been in Jerusalem forever. They never left, and they're the ones. I'll have them on to answer these questions. I don't feel comfortable asking these questions.
Yeah, right. It's like kind of
Maybe
in-house laundry.
It's sort of like you want me to talk to you about my neighbor's problems.
Yeah, right.
But I will say, but what does break my heart is seeing the homogenization of the Jewish communities, which are beautifully diverse and wonderful. And we want, and I wrote an article very early on, the Palestinians need true friends. And I was a big supporter, and look, they go after Hamas. But within 2 weeks, they dropped a bomb on a church. And I'm like, wait, what's going on here? Last December, or just, this past December, they bombed 7 churches in Lebanon. And then they bombed the oldest church in Syria. And you have to start asking yourself, why do you keep bombing our churches without explanation? And why isn't anyone? Now, there are some great Christian leaders like the Reverend Munther and Pizzaballa and others who are speaking out. But it's not what you would hope. But I want to give you some stories. You asked for some stories from the region. This idea that Arabs or Muslims or Kurds or, and it's obviously, it's a very diverse region, by the way. So there's these constituent communities. Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan even are incredibly ethnically and religiously diverse. Under the Ottoman Empire for 750 years, there were over 80 religions that existed and continued for 750 years. So it's a very diverse place. It's not as we would think. Now, are there virulent ideologies of cruelty and hatred sweeping across the Middle East? Of course, but it would be expected after decades of brutal wars with the armies of the world marching up and down your countries, shattering order and funding extremists, like we know has happened thanks to Doge. Yep. So, but I'll share one story. I was with the Peshmerga as they were liberating Christian and Yazidi communities from ISIS about a decade ago. And I had a documentary crew. I was shooting a little documentary for policymakers on the plight of Christians in Iraq with the rise of ISIS. There were Yazidi fathers, and ISIS showed no respect for Yazidi. The Christians got more respect. That they were just, the things that they did, your audience probably knows, to these Yazidi girls is unspeakable, and I'm not going to say it. But the Peshmerga, they're Kurdish and they're Muslim, mostly, but there were some Kurdish Yazidi soldiers in the unit that I was with as well. And as they were pushing ISIS back, there were Yazidi fathers that would follow along, hoping that their daughters were being brought back from the front as they were liberating these girls. And at one moment, I realized that this little Yazidi girl that was being brought back by some Peshmerga, and this tiny Yazidi father, who was kind of off to my right and a little bit behind me, I saw out of the corner of my eye them see each other, and I saw this father and daughter reunited. And I didn't want to invade it with my eyes nor with our cameras. So I told my team, shut off the mics, turn the cameras away. And I looked away. And I just looked at these Peshmerga, these Kurdish soldiers, middle-aged men with old Soviet-era AK-47s and beat-up pickup trucks fighting ISIS that had the top-of-the-line, newest U.S. equipment. Ask yourself that question. How did that happen? And I thanked God for these men that were saving Christian and Yazidi lives. So to paint everyone in the region as part of some cult of death, there was another woman, Dr. Nehum Ghaffari. Dr. Nehum, she was a refugee from Iraq, fleeing Saddam Hussein, and she was Kurdish. She fled as a little girl, settled in Sweden, became a cardiac surgeon, and she would work half the year in Sweden, save her money, and she would go the other half of the year into Iraq to serve the Yazidi. Now, she was Kurdish, secular, but from a Muslim family. She would let herself get captured by ISIS so she could care for the Yazidi girls. Then when she was trying to reunite Yazidi girls, and I have a video of me giving her an icon of Saint Damien and of Kalapapa, of Molokai, and Mother Marianne Cope of Kalapapa, Molokai, I gave her prayer cards. I have a video of it. I could show it to you, where I said, don't be like them. I don't want a prayer card with you, Doc. And it's kind of, it's uncanny. She died of COVID, while in Syria, reuniting Yazidi ISIS. They're called ISIS babies. I didn't come up with the term. These ISIS children that were conceived in rape, back to their mothers. She died trying to reunite children with their mothers. And so when you try to paint this region of a cult of death, that's not true. When you try to paint every Muslim there as some kind of extremist, that's absurd. And I have never in my life heard any Muslim to my face, as I've traveled the region, say things like flatten Manhattan or flatten Tel Aviv. I've heard people say flatten Gaza. And went through my own mind when I saw the footage of October 7th on October 7th? Went through my own brain. Didn't come out of my mouth, but it stayed in my head. But I heard it. I said it to myself. I said to myself, flatten Gaza. Could you believe it? I run the Vulnerable People Project. But I said this to myself. But I have never, in very close friendships with Iraqis, with Syrians, with Palestinians, I've never come across a theologian that says things like Jonathan Cahn, that the Jews are the reincarnation of Amalekites and they need to be destroyed. But I hear evangelical Christians say that the Palestinians are the reincarnation. What is this? This is this Gnostic nonsense, and they need to be destroyed. This kind of prejudice and bigotry, I've really fallen in love, with the region. But as a Catholic man, as a Christian man, we serve the vulnerable. I took Ecclesiastes when Solomon said, I looked all over the world and all I see is suffering. And on the side of the oppressor is power. And on the side of the oppressed, there is no one. I took that as my challenge when I founded VPP. I'm going to stand with the oppressed against power. And that's where I commend you. Your organization, and you have a really delicate tightrope to walk, where we are friends. We support people. We support our friends. You just named one of my best friends earlier today in your talk, who's in a position of great power. We have friends in great power, and we want to support them and we want to influence them. But at the end of the day, I don't stand with them. I am a Catholic. At the end of the day, I stand with the widow. I stand with the orphan. I stand with the vulnerable, the victims of war, the child in the womb. And I stand between power and the vulnerable. I stand between the violent and the vulnerable. And our goal is to harness power. This is our goal. And to get power, the power of the state, the power of the church, the power of our wealth as a community. And we want to order it to serve the vulnerable. There's only two ways to order a society. There's only two ways to order a family. There's only two ways to order a community, a country, or the world. It's either we, the powerful, exploit and take advantage of the vulnerable, or the powerful bow and serve the vulnerable. And I, as an adult convert to the Catholic faith, am so grateful. My son said to me the other day, Dad, you've been nerfed. I didn't know what that term meant. He says, thank God you've been nerfed by the Catholic Church. He said, so what does that mean, son? It means I wouldn't want you in this world if you weren't a Catholic.
He's pulling out gaming terms on you.
He's pulling out gaming. You've been nerfed, Dad. Explain it to people. But what I mean by that, I'm so grateful for our faith. I'm so grateful for like St. Maximilian Kolbe's example, or Father Jerzy Popescu, or Franz Jägerstatter, or Elizabeth Anscombe, or Bishop Fulton Sheen. I'm so grateful for their example, that they teach us that we are called to stand with the vulnerable against the gods of the city. St. Ignatius of Antioch, a friend of mine was reading to me last night from his biography, where it was said that, I believe it was to Trajan. Trajan said, "You're evil." He says, "If by evil you mean I resist the gods of the city in obedience to the God that created the heavens and the earth, then yes, I am." But that's what we're called to do. We're called to resist the enthusiasms of violence and hatred, and stand with the vulnerable, because we know the truth that every human person is made in the image and likeness of God. And I don't care a friend of mine recently said when he read my Douglas Murray article, he goes, "That's very brave." And he goes, "Actually, it wasn't brave at all, because you've seen the polling." And I said, "You're right. It's not brave at all, because I have seen the polling." And I said, and I do understand that. I said, but also, I'm not worried about being how history sees me. I want to please God. And I run the Vulnerable People Project. And Rene Girard says, when you stand with the vulnerable, you become as vulnerable as them. But if you find that your commitment to the vulnerable brings you wealth, fame, and prestige, you exploit the vulnerable. And can you imagine? It's the worst thing in the world. So with the nature of my job, I walk on this tightrope of weakness will lead to unimaginable evil. I could just focus on the Yazidi. I could just focus on the Uyghur. I could just focus on the Christians in Nigeria and Sudan, and there'll come no kick to my face. But then the Christians in Gaza will look up and say, does no one have the courage to raise their voice for me? Not even the Vulnerable People Project.
Yeah.
So I really have been left without a choice. So I commend you. You didn't have to do the show, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of negative comments. But I commend you. And I think we're seeing the tide turn.
Yeah.
And I pray that with your generation as well, that we can wash away the rise of anti-Semitism and this kind of cruelty as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience, Jason. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you said it way more eloquently, and you live in a lot more danger than I do. But if I don't have I don't even know if this is courageous or whatever, but if I'm not searching for the truth all the time, what am I doing? I'm just leading people along to get a paycheck or something like that. It's just, it'd be a total dishonor to myself and to the people to the audience that we have. So even if it was hard to hear some of this, or maybe you get angry at first and you come around to it, hard to imagine being in a better place than standing with Jesus between the powerful and the vulnerable, even if that makes you uncomfortable, or there's narratives around it, or there's powerful forces at play. What are we doing? So, I mean, you're probably too humble to bring this up, but I saw you rescued 3 religious orders from Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Sudan. Delivered 3 million meals in Afghanistan, provided security, as you talked about, in Nigeria. If people want to help you out and want to contribute to this mission, where can they do that?
Yeah, our website, thank you very much for that. Our website is vulnerablepeopleproject.com, vulnerablepeopleproject.com. And I am really grateful for our apostolate. And I'm grateful that people support us and that we're able to do our work, And this week alone, we're rescuing hundreds of Christians from Khartoum, and we're bringing them into the Nuba Mountains as the war erupts and violence is spreading. We were able to evacuate a religious order from Sudan last year, and sadly, one of our partners, one of men on our team, young man on our team, died in the process of rescuing these nuns. So, our heroes are really our partners on the ground. They come from the communities we serve. But the greatest privilege of my work is no matter where I go in the world, I'm met by the mystical. I'm met by the body of Christ, and they inspire me. They're the ones that are really courageous. They're joyful. They don't ever feel sorry for themselves. With Halil, he's someone maybe you should have on your show. He inspires me. He's so brave. I pray for him. This is the week anniversary of his sister dying. My little sister's my best friend, and I can't imagine losing my little sister. His sister died actually on the way leaving Gaza through a quote unquote safe route where she was told to walk. She died, and she was leaving to go to college and join her brother in the United States. And Halil was at the Catholic University of America getting his degree in Catholic social teaching, his master's. So this is a committed Catholic family that are attending a church that was founded by St. James, the cousin of Jesus. And on the comment section to our podcast, people are tweeting, "Deport him." And these aren't the left These are people that are part of my political tribe. Andrew Breitbart was one of my best friends. I'm a regular guest on Steve Bannon's The War Room. I campaigned for Trump. And there are people that share my political identification that go on the thread of my podcast with a Christian from the Holy Land who descends from the apostles' families in the first century Christian converts families, who lost his sister and his father to the war. And when they were in places where they were supposed to be safe, his sister and his other sister and his mother were wounded when the church was bombed. His mom was wounded twice, actually, almost died once. And he spoke on our podcast, I felt very eloquently and measured. And responses to this Christian man speaking out, people who share our political identification, or at least mine, are posting, hashtagging, members of the Trump administration saying, deport Halil. Our country needs well-formed Catholics now more than ever to leaven this sort of cruelty, which is really, again, a fundamental denial of what Western civilization is and what we are as conservatives trying to conserve.
Amen. Give me his info. I'd love to have a conversation with him.
I will. Yeah, he's a great man.